Osiyo. When federal troops and state militia started rounding up the Cherokee in the spring of 1838, General Winfield Scott had ordered that 23 forts were to be built throughout the southeast to house the Indians who had been evicted from their homes. But there were ultimately 31 forts, or stockades actually, that were built to contain the 17,000 Cherokee to be relocated to the west. There were 13 in Georgia, 5 in North Carolina, 8 in Tennessee, and 5 in Alabama. Now, from the stockades, the Cherokee were to be transferred to one of 11 internment camps. 10 were built in Tennessee and 1 in Alabama. From those camps, they were divided into 17 groups of about 1,000 persons each, called detachments. The detachments would then leave from one of the 3 embarkation locations on the forced march to the new Indian Territory in what is now called Oklahoma. The Cherokee called this 800-plus mile trek the Trail Where They Cried.
You know, it's hard for me to imagine today riding along the original route of that trail in my air-conditioned car just what my ancestors endured over those 800-plus miles. The trek was challenging for all and impossible for thousands. Over 4,000 Cherokee died in the internment camps and along what we now call the Trail of Tears. Nicole Caldwell, in her book Stories Behind the Trail of Tears, writes that the trail stretches as a series of scars across the American landscape. Facilitators stand as representation of America at its worst, and captives as a mark of stunning resiliency in the face of indescribable cruelty and terror." Unquote. But the Cherokee Tears and their resiliency and resolve to remain a great nation began months before they set foot on the trail. Whooping cough, typhus, dysentery, cholera, and starvation were epidemic in the internment camps, killing thousands and leaving thousands weakened and ill-prepared to walk the 800 miles to Oklahoma. In fact, several of our Blair family survived the removal and made it to Oklahoma, but sadly, several didn't. The trail actually consisted of 5 different routes taken by 17 detachments of Cherokee being relocated to the west. There was the water route, the northern route, and 3 named after conductors or the leaders of the detachments which took those routes: the Taylor route, the Binge route, and the Bell route. All except the Bell route were over 800 miles long and traversed Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, Missouri, and Arkansas to arrive at the Indian Territory in Oklahoma. It took up to 6.5 months for the Cherokee to travel the 800 miles to the new Indian Territory, with the last detachment arriving on March the 24th, 1839. Now, our Cherokee family, who were removed along the Trail Where They Cried, were a part of the Taylor Detachment, led by Assistant Chief Richard Taylor from Ringgold, Georgia. Taylor was a full-blooded Cherokee and the founding father of Ringgold. He was a descendant of Nancy Ward, one of the great legends of the Cherokee and the first beloved woman of the Cherokee Nation, who fed and clothed General George Washington's army while it was in Tennessee during the Revolutionary War. Chief Taylor himself, in the book History in Catoosa County, is said to have been, quote, probably the most outstanding man the Catoosa County area has produced, unquote. Taylor was a delegate to for the Cherokee Nation to Washington, D.C., and he supported the creation of the Brainerd Mission and School to educate Cherokee children. He owned a 150-acre plantation, an inn, a tavern, saw and grist mills, and a toll gate. His plantation, Mount Hope, stood on a hill where Ringgold's Kentucky Fried Chicken and Waffle House are today. The Taylor detachment left Oklahoma on September the 20th, 1838, and numbered among its party George Blair, Margaret Blair Henson, and Jenny Blair Sweetwater and their families. The detachment consisted of 51 wagons, 358 riding horses, 897 people, and had 15 births and 55 deaths along the way on the journey. They arrived in Oklahoma on March 24th, 1839, the last of the detachments to arrive there. Chief Taylor died in Tahlequah, Oklahoma on June the 15th, 1853, and is buried in Tahlequah City Cemetery with his wife, Susan. Now, on a more personal side, I told you that Colonel James Hayes Blair's Cherokee maiden was Sarah Sally, the daughter of old Yonaguska, chief of the Eastern Cherokee Nation. Now, Yonaguska was a great, highly regarded chief. He had several wives, and with one of them, Gowistiski, a son called Young Yonaguska, and a daughter, Sarah Sally. The colonel and Sarah had one son, George, whose Cherokee name was Odequanosi, and three daughters, Margaret or Peggy, Jenny, and Sarah Lucy or Lucy. After their last daughter with the colonel, Sarah Lucy, was born, Sarah Sally was formerly married to an Irish trader who called himself John Smith. His Cherokee name was Chustuli. They received a grant for 1,000 acres and moved to the Hiawassee River, somewhere near Murphy, North Carolina. Sally and John had three sons, Samuel, William Quincy, and Henry Jarrett, whose Cherokee name was Hali, and one daughter, Esther. Haven't found too much more about her except that her grandson, the son of Henry Jarrett Hali, was Nimrod Jarrett Smith, who was the principal chief of the Eastern Band of Cherokee from 1880 to 1891. Now, neither Sarah Sally nor her last daughter with the colonel, Sarah Lucy, were relocated to Oklahoma because of her father. Old Yonaguska's intervention. As a chief, with the help of his adopted white son, William Holland Thomas, managed to avoid the removal of about 800 Cherokee, for whom he was chief at that time, by negotiating a deal with the state of North Carolina called the Act of Relief. The act was passed by the North Carolina legislature in 1836 and provided that any Cherokee who took an oath of allegiance to the state and to the U.S. in open court would be, quote, invested with full power and authority to purchase and hold land and personal property in this state, unquote, and would not be subject to forced removal and relocation to Oklahoma. Sarah Sally and her family, and Sarah Lucy and her family immediately took the oath so that they could stay in North Carolina. Not only does this explain why Sarah and her daughter Sarah and their families could remain in North Carolina, but also explains why today there's an Eastern Band of Cherokee in addition to the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. The 800 or so people that Chief Yonaguska saved from relocation with the Act of Relief, along with over 1,000 Cherokee who hid in the Smoky Mountains until after the removal in 1838, became the basis of the Eastern Band of Cherokee, today headquartered in Cherokee, North Carolina, on the Qualla boundary. And just so you know, the Qualla boundary is not a reservation. It's actually a land trust supervised by the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs for all the Cherokee in the Eastern Band because they own the land in common as a tribe. The land, mostly around the Oconaluftee River, was purchased for the tribe between the 1840s and 1870s by Yonaguska's adopted white son, William Holland Thomas, under his name. So the land was not given to the Cherokee by the U.S. government, and as such is not a reservation. The Qualla boundary today is about 57,000 acres with over 8,000 tribal members living and working there. But now back to the family. As the cast grows, it becomes harder to know all the players and keep them straight. So let me reiterate. Sarah Lucy was the Colonel's last Cherokee daughter. She was born in 1801 and married a full-blood Cherokee, John Calvin Timpson. Now, John's Cherokee name was Kasat-Lawi. Timpson was a well-known and respected member of the tribe. He was the first Baptist convert of the Valleytown Mission, a delegate to the Cherokee Constitutional Convention, and a liaison to federal Indian agents at that time. Timpson and Sarah Lucy had 2 sons and 7 daughters, and lived quietly and comfortably near Murphy, North Carolina, until her early death at age 40 on the 4th of May, 1841. I've not been able to locate where Sarah Lucy is buried. It's interesting to note, though, that her husband, John Calvin Timpson, married after her death and with his new wife had 4 more daughters and 3 more sons before he was murdered. On the night of August the 31st, 1856, several men, apparently intent on robbery, set Timpson's house afire and then shot him as he ran out the front door, attempting to escape the flames.
I'll tell you more about the rest of the family in the next episode when we begin to follow the trail where they cried. We'll start where our Cherokee family started, and that's at Ross's Landing in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And we'll follow their route with the Taylor Detachment through Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, Missouri, and Arkansas to their new home in the Oklahoma Indian Territory. And since there's no word for goodbye in the Cherokee language, I'll just say, Donadago Wahi, Wado.
A lady New York do New York who say lay, Uyo Nilo say, Gananda.